Bulavinaka, Namaste and good evening. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay, Narayan, and tonight we have a guest who's returning after a lot of success. He's had some great stories to tell. Of course, after the Shop and Save Super Rugby Pacific season coming to an end earlier this year, but then he was called into the Fiji Water Flying Fijians setup. And Naca Cawanibuka, the head of athletic performance of the Shipping Fijian Drua, and he was also the lead strength and conditioning coach for the Fiji Water Flying Fijians in the recent Rugby World Cup 2023. Now in camp with the Drua, starting preparations for the new season. Busy man, but thank you very much, Naca, for coming for our listeners and viewers.
Pinaka Vijay, good to be back, and always a pleasure to come and share some stories of rugby.
A lot of people have been asking, even when you were in France after the first game, and I started getting requests for you to come on a show, and I said, we will not disturb you during the competition, but definitely we've managed to find time now, and we're thankful for that. Naca, we'll talk about many things tonight, and a lot of people wanted to know a few things in terms of the team, in terms of the Flying Fijians, also some background on the Drua as well, because you have been with the setup for some time. So we're looking forward to your answers as well and your stories. Firstly, Taveuni was definitely an interesting experience for the players to reconnect to their roots and the people before they actually went to the Rugby World Cup.
Yes, obviously that was, I believe, what set the team on the front foot. And at this time, just want to pay credit to head coach Sai, the management team, all the coaches who were involved, all the backroom staff, medical staff, SNC staff, and the players themselves. And all their families who sacrificed a lot when the boys are out there preparing and representing our nation. And to the people of Bonole and the people of Taveuni. That I think, there's images that came out of there that floated on social media. It was something that was probably very new and not been done to that extent by previous Flying Fijians teams. And this was a team where that was the mission, to reconnect back to their roots. And when I got to watch the videos again, and we were up in France, I remember one of the weeks, I think we were up in Bordeaux, and we went back and revisited some of the footage from the Taveuni week. And you can just feel that sense of belonging in the players, reconnecting back to village life, to their community, to where they started, to Fiji.
Who are they representing?
Yes.
What is the value of doing something like that, knowing that you'll be away in a different country? Of course, people now, Fiji has a team of players with background who grew up in Fiji, who may have not grown up in Fiji and have lived their life overseas. The value of that and coming together, we can see that in the Drua setup as well.
Well, that is powerful. That is immensely important. I think for any campaign as big as a Rugby World Cup, you look at South Africa when they won the tournament, and you see how it's just out in the media how the team was strongly connected to the people. And when Sia stands up and talks, he's talking for the people of South Africa. And when the Flying Fijians went, that's why Taveuni, as I said before, was so important to this team and special for this team as well. And those players, that would have been a highlight of the preparation phase. Taking them back to a village setting. There's 14 provinces in Fiji. It's impossible to take us to all the 14 provinces, but we were quite blessed to go to the Garden Island, and from there the boys who came from other provinces, they could reconnect straight away with wherever their villages were, their provinces, just by being there on Taveuni Island. And for boys who come back from Europe, the boys who were in the Drua, that was an ideal time just to reconnect with their meaning as Fijian. And going back to the basics, and sometimes when you look at high performance sports at its very pinnacle is less about sports sciences. It's less about all the cash and everything. It comes down to people. It comes down to the human heart, and you can't buy that with money. And there's no science that can describe that. We have it in loads, and that's what Taveuni brought out. That's what it embedded as a foundation, and that underpinned everything that followed after. At the end of the 15-week campaign, when we come back from the battle, you can look back and say, you know what, that was a good thing to do. When we took the boys, took them on a boat, set them out for a number of hours out to Honolulu. And that was a great way to start.
You can see some of the learnings from the Drua setup, which has a similar culture and tradition from the beginning. You did share with us about knowing where you belong in the setup, and actually the war cry of the Drua and the setup. If you can talk about what is the value that comes out of it, apart from, as you said, the sports science and having heart in the whole project.
Yeah, it's important that, you know, when you're preparing for a campaign like that, or for any team sports, this is the thing about team sports. We have to build chemistry. When we talk about team chemistry, you talk about how individuals will understand each other, know each other well, so that you can build that trust and that relationship. And that goes across the playing group, but also among staff, and then how we integrate. That's a vital part. Because you can't afford to have a team that's going to a battle as big as a Rugby World Cup, and there's little small silos in the team. It'll show on the big stage. It'll show whether we are tightly knit or whether there are little holes. And for us, you know, different teams have different ways how they deal with it. For us, that is what makes Fijians tick. Because, you know, once you tick that, and you embed the values and our spiritual values, the principles of performance, and our culture, that's what builds us and makes us unique as Fijian.
Can you shed some light on strength and conditioning plan for players leading up to the Rugby World Cup? You were called in to be the lead coach for strength and conditioning for the Fiji Water Flying Fijians, and the work that had to be done and the amount of work that was already done.
Well, I'll say this, and I must pay credit to, you know, our head of performance for the Flying Fijians, David Sylvester, Tweety, a lovable man in our environment. So he's a very, very experienced practitioner in the field. He's, in fact, been part of the England setup at the Rugby World Cup in 2007, 2011, 2019 when they reached the final. So he knows how to prepare Rugby World Cup teams. He's worked with some of the best coaches in the world. So he was brought in and you know, he was leading the show and running the programs, and you know, looking after the northern-based players, which is very important. How we monitor the Europe-based players. So he was hot on that, you know, visiting clubs, updating the coaches, and meeting the boys, seeing the boys, staying in contact with them. Because down here with Drua, obviously they're in a controlled environment. Everyone is in that Drua space. You know, there's about, obviously over 50% of the team was made up of the Drua players, which made it a bit easy in terms of how we monitored. So Tweets and I would share information. I would share notes on where the Drua boys are coming in from. This has never been done as part of our previous Rugby World Cup campaigns.
First time ever?
First time ever to have that done. I mean, I was part of 2007, 2011 Rugby World Cup, but you know, most times we don't know how the players, what shape are they coming in, what form are they in. So that's something that is quite important for the Flying Fijians this year. And strength and conditioning, you know, athletic performance is really, I would say, the foundation. You cannot expect performance if you are not in a physical conditioning to perform. You know, so Tweety was there, and also we had Ben Cousins, you know, a sports scientist from London Irish. So, you know, with a superb medical team that's led by William and Dr. Gary, who was there, and Brian as well, one of our physios. So we formed this team, right? It's important that I mention them, because when you talk about strength and conditioning, it ties in with our medical team. And this is the team that supports what the coaches want. And our job is to make sure that our boys are ready to deliver at every single training session. Because you cannot expect to perform if you cannot arrive to train, and keeping the boys healthy. So when you look at it, you know, players coming down from the north, like look at Levani Botia or Waisea and neither level. These players have clocked up massive mileages in terms of their game minutes. And like us, the boys here in the Drua, like boys who come from the northern hemisphere, they easily play over 20 games. At least 20 games, more than that. Some going to 30s, and that's massive. So when they come down and prepare for Rugby World Cup, the value of a Rugby World Cup is you actually have time to work with these players. The beauty about this year, and this is something for me that I take out of it, we had lesser players who we had to manage with injuries. Now you got players who are coming in from France, from the UK, from Japan, New Zealand, and boys who are here. And to manage them, and most of them are in decent shape. So you don't have to worry too much about rehabilitation, even though we had a few players in that category. But the SNC team, the medical team, really worked hand in glove to help support the players to prepare.
You had Drua players, as you said, that almost half of the squad was made up of Drua players. And this is the first time ever that we've got our own Super Rugby franchise players who went and featured in the Rugby World Cup. Players like Tevita Ikanivere, Celestino Ravutaumanda, Frank Lomani, Simeone Kuruboli and others. Looking at their progressive development, the changes as they went along, how was that?
It's a thing of beauty. As a coach, and I'll say this for our other Drua coaches as well. It's just so pleasing to see when you look at a young man, a young talent who, like 2 years ago, I'm thinking back at Lennox Head, where we were camping, and it was the 8th of November 2021. We assembled the team for the first time. And when we got to put the boys through their paces, we got them to run VO2 grids, mass running. And you just see the boys just, holding in there and not dying on the field. But when you see them, and you think to yourself as a coach, these players are first time being exposed to this kind of training. Imagine what they will be in 2 years' time. So to see how far those players you've mentioned there, Vijay, come through to a Rugby World Cup campaign and see them blossom on the world stage against the world's premier players. And a lot of those players have been exposed to high performance programs easily more than 5 years, some 10 years. So when you get some of these boys who have been in there for such a short time, and to perform and to exceed, expectations, it's a real confidence booster for our systems on island. And this goes down to our school systems. This goes down to our club provincials. And we probably won't have time to talk about that, because that'll be an important area that we will have to really, support and make sure that it's well looked after, because that'll fit into our Drua program. And a strong Drua, as I've always said, will form a strong Flying Fijians.
Players like William Mata coming out of the 7 setup, winning gold in the Olympics in Rio, and playing in this World Cup, looking like the best version of himself. How much work goes in there for players like that, knowing that they've been playing for some time but still coming out at their best in this World Cup?
Now that's a classic example. So Willie Mata hardly played Skipper Cup in Fiji. He played rugby league. He played a bit of rugby when he was at RKS, but then he played probably just one game for Narayan in the Skipper Cup. Now he first joined Fiji Sevens back in 2014. I remember his first tournament was in Wellington. That was a young Willie Mata. Very shallow strength and conditioning base for him, but a phenomenal footballer. I mean, you look at Bill Mata. I remember when he was training back at Uprising, back in the day when Ben was around, Ben Ryan. You see this big boy, 6 foot plus, he's running like a center 3/4. He can pass a long, flat, lateral rugby pass, like 20 meters on the fly. You almost think it's Stephen Lackham doing that. And he hadn't even played provincial rugby. But sevens was what got him into the national team. And then that exposed him on the big stage. He hadn't played any international rugby for Flying Fijians, and then he got signed up with Edinburgh. He is a classic example of what talent can be on island, even without exposure at skipper level. He's one example. There are other players who came through Fiji Sevens, and then they've made it big on the world stage and overseas professional clubs. And that just goes to show how players can thrive and blossom when they are put in the right environment. And Bill Mata is a classic example of that. Even our skipper Wise Netherlevel played sevens for Fiji and then went on abroad. Leon Nakarawa, he played Flying Fijians first, then played Fiji Sevens. He probably played more tests than Flying Fijians and international sevens tournaments, more than Skipper Cup. So for us, the sevens pathway is so important. Why do I say this? This is because in the sevens series, players come into an environment where they learn how to train, learn how to compete with international teams. Because we can always play against Fijians, but we don't play Fijians often overseas. We were playing international teams who play different. They learn how to win. And I think I've mentioned this before. Just like the 2003 World Cup team, 2007, a lot of those players came through the sevens pathway. So 2 pathways for me, so important. Fiji sevens and Fiji under 20s. Those are the 2 bedrock for us. If we can tick that, sevens is always provided, and that under 20, if we can lift how our under 20 performs in the next 4 years, as they are in the Junior World Championship, if our under 20 can mix it up with the very best and stay within the top 6 kind of bracket within the JWC, that's going to set us in good stead for test match rugby. Because when you look at the Ikaniveres and Derinalangis, Kurvolis, Botitus, all these players came through under 20.
Coming out of secondary school rugby, under 20s into the Drua setup, yes, or other setup in a pathway to the Flying Fijians. Yes. Just asking about accountability. This is in terms of you monitoring the players in ensuring that they are at their level best, or based on their targets, that they are achieving whatever they have to achieve as far as strength and conditioning is concerned. For the people, how do you ensure that they are accountable, that you know what they're doing? How do you track them?
Yes, we have the that phrase, numbers don't lie. And numbers for key figures, like I've mentioned before, body fat, body composition, how much of your body is made up of lean muscle mass. Because that's the ideal. We don't want to be carrying excess body fat. Because if, say for example, I'm a prop forward, I want to be the best in the world. I want to be known as the best loose head prop in the world. My skin folds needs to be under 100 millimeters of body fat. That's across the 7 different sites that we measure. And we've been doing this for years now. I've been doing it for more than 10 years within the Fiji setup. Under 100 mils is my target. So for example, I want to be at 90 millimeters. If I'm at 150, I'm over by 60 millimeters of body fat. That is equivalent to 6 kilograms of dead weight. So I'm running around with a 6 kg flour in my back pocket. You can imagine how I'll feel after 5 minutes of play. If I'm playing against, like say for example, Wales, who play quite high tempo, and they kick chase, and then we kick counter, and we do that, and the ball is in play for about maybe 3 or 4 minutes, or if like the New Zealand versus Ireland quarterfinal, that last phase went, I don't know what, 6 minutes or something, 37 phases. If I'm carrying 6 kilograms of dead weight in my pocket, I can't last 1 minute.
You'll puff out.
Yeah, I'll puff out. I will be slow to get off the floor. I will be slow to go from breakdown to breakdown. And when I'm tired, I can't think clearly, so I will make poor decisions. I will be a high-risk yellow card player. And those are all the factors. That's just from one component of body composition. And that will lead to being, like excess body weight.
How do you monitor?
So we do...
you have a plan for each player?
Yep. So we, at Drua, we do it monthly. We do monthly body composition checks. And for our red flag players, we will look to do fortnightly. Just to keep players on check. And players are, for them, those numbers mean a lot. And not only body composition, but we do fitness testing as well. We test for work capacities. And they are closely related. Those are testing items that we measure. We test for jump scores. I mentioned in one of our earlier talks, our jump scores for players like Celestino Ravutaumanda. When his jump scores were busting the roof, this is going back 18 months ago, and that's before he started to tear it up on the field, we could already forecast, these are the scores this boy is hitting, that's world-class numbers. He is going to rip into it when competition comes. So that's what monitoring does. Now, you don't have to wait for different intervals, because every training session, testing is training, training is testing. The traditional Fijian mindset has been, we fear testing. As soon as you say a test comes, people, they start to shudder, because our school system hasn't actually introduced that into our curriculum. within the physical education program. If you go to a lot of these countries, like our tier 1 nations, they test primary school students on the blip test or the 1.5K run, whatever it is, from class 6, class 7. I went into Newington Boys College in Sydney back in 2010. That's 13 years ago now. And in their PE room, they had an actual fully fledged gym. And they had blip test results for class 6, class 7, class 8. And some of their scores was the same as our Warriors back then, even better. And so our players are coming into testing when they reach our national team at like 20, 21 years old. And those athletes have been doing it from age 11 and 10. So that's something we need to catch up on.
Hopefully the Fiji Rugby Union now taking over secondary schools rugby, we may see some of those things happening at an earlier time now.
Yeah, I think it's happening in some schools. I think, a lot of our coaches who are coaching athletics now in schools and even rugby, they've been exposed to, education and enlightenment programs we've been running for the last 5-10 years now. They've started to do that, but the vast majority, we need to do that, given we've got such a big pool of talented players.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
I've always resorted to drugs because of the work that I do as a coping mechanism.
You said you started sex work and drugs at the same time?
I was 12 years old.
Do you believe, based on the current situation, your salary and allowances should be reviewed and reduced?
Definitely, I think it should be reviewed to reflect what is there in the market.
Is the government of the day promoting nepotism within our community and hatred towards Indo-Fijians?
Thank you very much. The answer is no.
$1 in $3 of our taxes goes towards servicing our debt. So you can't say it's nothing.
There's also the need to do financial inclusion a bit better.
What is your message to the people who may rate you as not good enough for finals rugby?
Success doesn't just happen overnight.
Fiji Village Straight Talk with Vijay Narayan, brought to you by the Ministry of Health and Medical Services.
Empower yourself. Take control of your health. Breast cancer doesn't discriminate. It can affect anyone, from women to men. But early detection is our best defense. We encourage you to take the first step. Get informed. Get screened. Join the fight. Spread awareness. Together, we can conquer this disease. Schedule your checkup today. Your health is your power. A message from the Ministry of Health and Medical Services.
Get ready to elevate your event with Total Event Company's top-notch gear hire services. From a stunning 12 by 12 meter adjustable stage and impressive 13 by 13 meter production roof, we've got your event covered. Our gear can fit any venue, big or small. Need tents? We offer 3 by 3 meter pagodas, 6 by 3 meter tents, and a grand 15 by 30 meter marquee tent. Turn your vision into reality. Choose Total Event Company for gear that makes your event shine. Visit the Total Event Company Facebook page or dial 3314766 to get in touch with us.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, the head of athletic performance for the Swai Shipping Fijian Drua, Naca Cawanibuka, who was also the lead strength and conditioning coach for the Fiji Water Flying Fijians. in the recent Rugby World Cup. Now, just the build-up to the Rugby World Cup. Fiji was quite fortunate to have had a great build-up, starting with having our own Drua in the Shop and Save Super Rugby Pacific.
Yes, that certainly added depth to the makeup of the squad. I remember we used to sit back at Rugby House, going back to the previous World Cup reps, when we do our depth chart analysis meetings of players in each particular position. We would probably fill the first two columns, and then the last two, you kind of almost like scratching your heads, and that was the dilemma we had back then. But now, thanks to the blessing of having a Super Rugby franchise, to all the stakeholders who have made that possible, that's only allowed the Flying Fijians to build depth in each position. The key to any successful Rugby World Cup campaign is hopefully you can have 4 world-class players per position, because you'll need to go 4 deep, sometimes 5 deep for any position at any given time, due to obviously injuries and things like that can happen, and we've experienced that as well. Not only us, but other teams in the competition.
We saw the Flyhalf situation in the recent World Cup for us, and the Flyhalf situation for the All Blacks in the 2011 Rugby World Cup.
It's exactly that, yes.
Where they went right from Dan Carter to the last few minutes being played by Stephen Donnell in the final. What's the learnings from there?
Well, I think now, obviously, hindsight is always a good thing. We can always learn from what has happened in the past, but now looking forward to the future, God willing for us, would be how can we maximize the next 4 years to really build capacity in each individual who we can, you've got a whole lead in now 4 years. So you can bleed players now. You can see where they are. There'll be players who have come in from the previous this World Cup to the next. Who are the newbies? How can we start bleeding them in? Because when you think about it, the Flying Fijians who went this year, the majority of those boys, now I'm going to say this now, there was no one in this year's Rugby World Cup team that had ever played World Cup finals footy. No one in our current team. We had 3 players I think, who were playing in their 3rd World Cup. They are legends of our team, legends of our game. We had a few players who were going in their 2nd World Cup, but the majority of the team, 1st ever World Cup. And that's, when you think about it, we Fijians are quite special. We overachieve when you really look at the context of experience, the context of facility, resources, finance, and that's what makes us special. And that should give us confidence, because if we can get our processes around how we prepare, players are getting themselves ready themselves instead of waiting for people. All our systems within our rugby, within our union, within all the different levels of our rugby, whether it's from governance down to grassroots, will win the William Webb-Ellis Trophy. I'll say that, totally believing it.
We also had great test rugby build-up. We played teams like France and England. You shed some light on people playing finals, quarterfinals Rugby World Cup for the first time. And there were also players who would have gone and played in Twickenham and a great achievement even before playing in the Rugby World Cup in France, and teams like France and England, and getting great results there, creating history. What was the feeling in camp? How were the players feeling?
Well, we give credit to Fiji Rugby and those who had organized, our previous management at FRU, who had organized these 2 tests leading into the Rugby World Cup, and with Simon in there leading that charge to allow us to play France and then play England. Now, a lot of our young players have now enjoyed a 2nd season of Super Rugby, but playing France in France, if you haven't played test rugby and you play that kind of atmosphere, it's just different. I mean, when we played France in Nantes, the sound of that crowd was so massive. And for our young Drua players, Taxi Caniver, I'm not sure if he started or if he came off the bench. Isona Silasila, all those players from our Drua team who started in that game. Look at the lights. The lights is glaring in your eyes, and also just the noise of the crowd. That was massive. We don't have that in Super Rugby. And our test matches down south, I think, does not meet up to what is offered up there. And that was their baptism of fire. That was massive for them. when you look at that, it really gives us a sense of assurance as Fijians, because our Flying Fijians beat France at Parc de France in Paris back in 2018 before the Rugby World Cup. Now, they did that up in France. So surely there's something special about Fiji rugby. When we went and played England in Twickenham the following week, the boys have come through the Nantes experience. They were at home in Twickenham. The boys were relaxed. They were chill because England came at whirlwind pace. The first 10-15 minutes, it was just weathering the storm. And then after that, the boys started to build into their game. And England couldn't handle that. And hats off to all the boys for all the hard work they did and the coaches on how we prepared the team. Because how we prepared the team was, everything is measured in terms of ball in play minutes in training, the high speed running that we were covering. The boys trained actually at an intensity higher than the game presented. So they were exposed to higher levels. So when the game came, they were able to endure that. They were able to absorb that England pressure. If you remember, going back to the first 10-15 minutes, we were just defending in our 22. And I know coaches will talk about this, because a big work on for us in our rugby is how we exit out of our half. Because if we can do that efficiently, then we will save a lot of our energy to do what we want to do, which is play. But our boys weathered that, and against a very experienced England team. I mean, that team we played in the quarterfinal, that England team, the majority of their starters played in the World Cup final 2019. They were not monkeying around anymore, and they wanted to put full guns blazing against us in Marseille. But Vijay, the experience that our boys have gotten with the build-up of the test matches, we played 3 PNC games, played France, played England. Those are the 5 tests they needed before we hit Wales in the World Cup opener.
Going into the Rugby World Cup, we are not a team with a big budget like the Tier 1 nations. What did Fiji focus on? What were the gold nuggets for Fiji leading up to its pool games?
I think the gold nuggets in the team was the players themselves. Now, we as Fijians are quite modest. Sometimes we fail to reflect on what we have achieved as players. In this team, our players who had won Olympic gold medals. We had players who have won the top 14, the Champions Cup, the European Cup, Pacific Nations Cup. Some have been, in the top 5 best players in Europe or in the world for that matter. And that in itself is a gold nugget. And then when you look at the coaching staff, a coaching staff who have experienced success as players, but success as coaches as well. And they've been in there, they've done that. They know what winning looks like. They know what preparation needs to look like in order to present the best opportunity to win on the weekend. So we got all this experience that's come in. And then we've got our Fijian way, and our spiritual preparation, which is, in this campaign, I would say, was more aligned with the performance and the coaching kind of approach. So, Talatala, Simon, the coaches, and the players themselves, the senior playing group. I think the senior players this year, they've come through the wars. They've learned from previous senior players they worked under, and that was important. But I'd say this. This was a big determinant of how the boys performed. The boys decided in Taveuni that they were going to have set intervals where they will not touch alcohol. They were not going to touch alcohol. They made the decision in Taveuni they were going to stay off it until the end of PNC, which they did, and they won the PNC. And they set short intervals and then had a little bit after the England game, and then they hold off until wherever we end in the World Cup. I'm not sure if that's been done in previous World Cups, but the senior players for this year decided that that's what they wanted to do, and they led from the front. And that's something so important, integral for any Flying Fijian in the future, is senior players have to lead from the front, not only by words, but by action, by values. And that for me, Vijay, was a big one, because I've been in Fiji teams long enough to know how alcohol can decimate our team. Not only through off the field, but it just destroys all the good work that we do. There's a lot of education that will need to go into this aspect of just how we manage it for our young men. But it goes outside the boundaries of Flying Fijians, because it's a thing for us as a people as well. We need to look at
maybe setups right from the under 20s going forward, where education starts at an earlier level, so that people are aware, where we can get better results, but at the same time the mindset is being built.
100%.
The power of having the right mindset, how important is that?
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn of how we manage alcohol, how we manage fame, how we manage popularity and success, right? Like sometimes you have a big win and then after that we fall. Why do we fall? We need help on how to stay consistent, to be relentless, to keep chasing for a better score, keep chasing for your better version. And at the top level, the margins of success and failure is micro. It is really small. But that's where we need to learn as Fijians. And we'll need support, because you got that 80-minute performance, but it's what we do and how we manage off the field that's important for us as a team. And then there's work in progress in that area that we're doing.
Wales was a close one, first up. Losing a game like that definitely dampens the spirits in camp. What had to be done to ensure that we fought back well in the next pool match against Australia?
Yes, that was a painful one, but it's a sign of the growth in the team. Fiji Rugby has come through the years. We're at this crossroad, right? We're at this crossroad into the future. And how the boys were able to bounce back, because they knew they had Wales. We didn't have to wait for the last 10 minutes to finish that job, to do that job, because we had enough possession, enough opportunities. The boys had, I would like to think, the boys physically, they were in good stead. I think for us, playing more tier 1 tests where we learn how to win tier 1 test matches. We played 10 test matches this season. 5 of them were against tier 1s. We won 3 of them. Wales was one of them that we lost, and England in the quarterfinal. But we won 3 out of 5 against tier 1 nations. I don't know when was the last time we did that in one season. So the boys were able to bounce back. They knew a lot of the missed opportunities we had in that first half, and they came back. They were hungry for Australia.
And you could see that. Fiji versus Georgia and Fiji versus Portugal tells us quite a story about teams that are coming up and no one can be taken lightly. What are the learnings from these games, knowing that we actually lost to Portugal 23 points to 24?
One thing is, Sun Tzu war principle, right? Sun Tzu, he wrote this. You know yourself and you need to know the enemy. You fear not 100 battles. So the Georgian team was trained by a well-reputed sports scientist, performance coach, Ben Pollard, who has exposure to Saracens, England, and a lot of big clubs, Stade Francais, I think, up in France. He led the Georgians. So we knew they would be super fit. We knew they would last the game. They will be in the hunt. When you look at Portugal, they're coached by Patrice Lachiske. I'm not sure if Fijians remember that guy. He was a flamboyant wing for France back in 1987 World Cup. I think they call him the Bayonne Express back then. So his game profile is around high-speed, high-tempo rugby, because they're smaller kind of athlete breed. So they're going to play into space, just play with the ball moving through the air. So we need to respect that. That's a thing for us, as a nation in high performance sport. And I'll speak for our 7s, but also for our 15s, more so, even for our Drua. This is part of our learning. We're only as good as our next game. After we've had a big win, like against Australia, how do we rock up? I've always seen that as the biggest danger. It's not that game, it's the next one. And it's the hours from after this game to our first session in the coming week. That for me has always been the loophole, and that will need to be accelerated. How we learn to bounce back after a win. I think our boys bounce back after a loss. That's not a problem. That's not an issue.
After a big win, that's a bit of a worry.
It is worrying.
It is a worry.
It is a worry. Go back to last year. We beat the Crusaders in Lautoka. We lost to the Reds in Brisbane the week after. And then we got hammered by the Highlanders down in Dunedin. How does that happen? When you've just beaten the Crusaders and then all of a sudden that has happened. I know the weather was tough for the Crusaders in Lautoka, but Nonetheless, it comes down to the mental aspect of how we prepare. A short story. Rassi Erasmus, going back a few years ago, he said this. When a young Springbok or when a young South African rugby player aims to become a Springbok, he is hungry, he is keen, he is chasing. Comes into the environment, he is keen to impress the coaches and he works hard, he does his extras. After a number of seasons, after building a number of test caps, starts to slacken off a little bit. Starts to get this feeling of entitlement. I am entitled to be in this position. That is the battle that we're facing. When we win a game, we have that feeling of entitlement. Now, what fuels entitlement? Sometimes we read too much into the praises that's coming on social media. Sometimes we look too much at what we did well rather than what we need to do. Because that team we just played is not the team we will play next. So the next enemy, the next team, the next opposition is a different beast altogether. So if I'm going to rest on what I did then, that is irrelevant because this is a different battle altogether. How do we coach that? So how do we address that mentally? Now, we have to unpack all that. We have to put it on the table. We have to make our players aware and coaches aware as well. And that for me is the Fijian psyche. I mean, I've been in this team for almost 20 years. And I've seen that day in, day out, year in, year out.
Well, hopefully we can fix that, because if we fix that, then we will have continuity and consistency.
Yes, because it becomes a habit. So what we need to do is untrain the whole old habit and inbuild new habits. But inbuild new habits, you don't have to wait for Saturday when you play the next opposition. It happens the day after you play.
It becomes an attitude.
Yes.
A habit.
It becomes part of the culture. So, something we did with Fiji Sevens back in the day was, after every single day of competition, like say for example we in Hong Kong, after pool game or pool game day one, the boys go back to the hotel after our team dinner, they sit at that dining table and they go through what they did that day, look forward to the next day. And at that stage of performance, the players have to lead that process and the coaches are just facilitating. You don't need coaches sitting in there because now it's player time. So these are some of the mechanics. How do we arrange our team meetings on 2 days after the game? How do we teach our players to be leaders? That Irish team had about 3 or 4 coaches on the field. Just two things for me, Vijay. The IQ, intelligence quotient of the game, and EQ, emotional quotient within each other, amongst themselves. If we can beef this up with our senior player group and build the maturity, responsibility and accountability with that group, they will drive it with other younger players. If we can nail that, Fiji will be top 2 in 15s rugby.
Just going into the quarterfinal against England, warning shots have already been fired. Big statement made, Fiji almost beating England. And the statement is the learnings coming from there that we can do even better than quarterfinals. What's your message to the people about that?
Like I said earlier, Vijay, numbers don't lie. So the stats that came out of the tournament after our competition at quarterfinal level, we've looked at all the positives. We've looked at the potential of what Fiji can do. But this is the thing we need to improve on. When you look at the errors made for all the teams in the World Cup, how many teams are there? 16 teams? 20 teams? The highest errors were made by the Chile team in the whole competition. Number 2 was Fiji. Error rates. So if we can minimize our error rate by just say 20%, 30% over an entire campaign in a tournament, I think we have chances to actually progress further. Just our error rates. Now when you look, that's 15s, that's Flying Fijians. When you look at the sevens, on the 7 series, Fiji traditionally is in that top 5 bracket. Now back to 2021, when we were preparing for the Tokyo Olympics, now we changed that. Our errors were way lower. Penalties against Fijians was way lower. This season, I think I'll mention that, while we competed well against the tier 1s, our penalties were way lower. It was below 10 and the coaches had that. That is part of our values, discipline. If we can get our penalties in a game less than 10, like single digits, we stand a high chance of winning a game. And that's discipline and penalties. But in terms of error rate, so that comes to focus and paying attention. That comes to habits. That comes to how we coach the players to execute skill. with good habits. So minimizing our mistakes. Having said that, our game profile, we are high risk rugby anyway. That's a given. We live and die by the sword. I remember Ben Ryan used to say that. Our game is free flow, high tempo, offloading game. That's fine. But if we can minimize some of those errors that we commit because of just loss of concentration. Why? Because probably we didn't hydrate well enough because I'm in a dehydrated state. Or I didn't accumulate my sleep mileage over the week. Or because I ate foods or drank fluids that I was not supposed to. Now those are all the controllables that leads to our errors chart. Most players don't understand this. Our goal is to actually educate them on that, which we have, but I think we need to do more of. And once our players can see that and make habitual changes in lifestyle and just how they prepare as an athlete, like I said, you can only imagine what we can achieve.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break.
Did you know cervical cancer is the second most common cancer among women in Fiji? But what is cervical cancer? And how do you know you have it? Cervical cancer is the growth of abnormal cells in the lining of the cervix. Nearly all cervical cancers are caused by HPV, a virus that can be spread through skin-to-skin contact of the genital area. Women in their 40s are at high risk of getting cervical cancer. Head to your nearest screening facility to get a pap test and make a difference to your health today. A message from the Ministry of Health and Medical Services.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight, Naca Cawanibuka, the head of athletic performance of Swire Shipping Fijian Drua, and recently the lead strength and conditioning coach for Fiji Water Flying Fijians. Naca, we've talked about mental toughness and mental preparation, so important in the professional sport now, and the importance of having that from a younger age, knowing what you have to do, knowing your limitations and how you can expand on that, knowing that consistency is the key. How much of work do you think needs to be done going forward?
I think number one is awareness. And if we can start early, that's why physical education is so important in schools. That's where 14 years of education from class 1 through to form 7. We need to look at how we can build that into our school system. We need to see how we can inbuild that into our moral values classes within the primary school system, high school system, but also within the physical education curriculum, because that's important. It will really help teach our athletes and our students on how they can use the power of the mind. Little things like goal setting, little things like how they review what they've done, goal setting, having a vision, like having a picture in their minds, what they're going to be like in 5 years, in 15 years, 10 years time, whatever it is, and working towards that. Mental skills on focus and concentration. And I've been reading a book on language of coaching, and it just learned two important things I've learned from there is and the author writes, the currency of learning is attention, when we pay attention. We live in a world today where our attention is actually diluted because there's so many forces coming in.
So many distractions.
And they say the attraction to distraction. And I think all of us fall victim to that. If it's happening to us adults, how much more to our kids? Focus, and also the other one was feedback. How do we give feedback? So if we can start doing that at schools, for our school sports, I'm sure they just prepare the athletes. We prepare our athletes. I was a former coach in high school rugby and sports. How do we review on the Monday after they've performed on the weekend? What questions do we ask them? How do we challenge their thinking? How do we empower them to be able to review themselves? So we need to give our children the tools. And I think this comes back to how we teach our teachers as well. This goes down to our colleges. And when we do our coaching education, now with our coaching education is how do we help our coaches on how they communicate. That's an important part of the mental aspect.
My issue also is right now the Ministry of Education is looking at the review of the curriculum, maybe something that they should look into as well as far as physical education and the current program is concerned?
Oh yeah, for sure. This is no disrespect or anything, but if you're going to ask the question, okay, in our schools, what do we do in our physical education classes? What do we do? If we ask our students, what do we do? What do we learn? In a year, at the end of the year, what have we learned from PE? I keep saying this because it's quite saddening to see that there's a missed opportunity we have there, and that's gone for generations. You and I are a product of that. I'm sitting here, and I was a student back in the 90s as we were. I can't remember what I learned in PE. I only remember we went out, given a ball and play touch.
You just do whatever you do. Just play touch rugby and time's up, go back in the class.
Yes, I never learned anything about nutrition, or hydration. And that's why education is so important. If we can expose our kids early to this, then this is where our teachers college up in Lautoka has to come in. And that's for us, within the rugby union, our sports education programs, reaching out to that sector, because they go out and educate our kids.
We'll talk to the Ministry of Education about this as part of our analysis on what will be reviewed. Now, work that should be put into discipline on and off the field, things like diet, you've touched on fitness, proper tackling, completion, the competition levels, as far as how do you manage the mindset going into a competition, playing X number of games, and how do you look after yourself? All those issues, what are your thoughts on discipline on and off the field?
Well, discipline is really maintaining good habits, and you can unpack that. You can look at it from different angles, on skill execution. Say, for example, you mentioned tackle there. How do we perform? The high tackle rule is a big topic of contention now in the rugby world. How do we teach good habits from school level? From club level? How many reps are we doing in a training session? How many reps are we doing in a week? And just still on tackling, because there's so many things we can talk about, but I'm just going to say on that particular aspect of rugby performance. So I remember back in the day with Ben Ryan and Gareth Baber, we would do chop tackle habits with the boys at every single training session, at every single warm-up before every game. Even leading into the Olympic final, the boys are doing chop tackle, bums on cheeks, shoulder under the ball, all that. Every day, all day.
You get your tackling right.
Get your tackling right. So when the boys stood on that Olympic podium in Tokyo, a young player like Chuta Weningolo Sireli Mangala, Yosef Amasi, who had never played World Series, they had covered all the mileage. We had touched on all the habits. You know, they had at least covered enough repetitions of skill execution before they go and perform against Argentina, against New Zealand in the Olympic final. So discipline has to be trained. Getting the players fitter, because you know when players are fit, they will be disciplined. Because usually your technique fails when you are tired. Your technique goes out the window when your conditioning level has dipped. If we have not trained the intensity of the game. So say for example, there's numbers, there's research to back this. When we expose players to X amount of minutes of ball in play in training, and they go, and if it's lesser than what the game entails, or what the game demands, then our players are undercooked. Our players are underprepared for when that stress will come. Because when the stress outweighs the preparation model, that's when discipline goes out. That's when your injury risk goes up. That's when your performance dips. So all this needs to be measured. All this comes through experience. All this comes through planning. And that is so important, because you cannot expect to win and perform and keep players healthy if that has not been looked after.
I'll ask you something personal now, in terms of your goal setting. By now, you are on our third show, and it's all about setting goals. It's about making sure we're going into a professional outfit. We have seen the teams that you have assisted grow, win gold medals, and grow in the competitions like what the Drua has done and the Flying Fijians. Of course, you would say it's not you on your own, but then in some areas you have your own goals that you achieve. How do you set them, and where does your motivation come from? 2018 we had finished the Paris Sevens in Paris, and then soon after that I didn't come straight to Fiji. I flew straight to Houston, and I met a good friend of mine, Vern Gambetta, at one of the sports coaches conferences there, and he said to me, I asked him, how do you stay on top of your game as a coach? He'd been coaching for more than 40 years. He's still hammering on, good old Vern. And he said to me, I try to read more than 30 books a year. He said to me, that's how I keep chasing. And that really sparked something in my head. Ever since that year, I've always tried to challenge myself to read books, challenge myself to try and listen to podcasts, to watch shows on not only within performance sport, but look at other things, try and grow myself. And for me, one of my big goals is that growing my knowledge so that I could help a player, and so that I could help develop another coach. Because that's my dream, that's my personal goal, to be able to share that gift with our young upcoming players, not only in rugby union, but in other sports as well, and help sharing that experience and journey that I've been quite privileged and blessed and honored to have enjoyed with other aspiring coaches out there, young Fijians who want to make it in life. And that's why for me personally, what I do is bigger than sports, and it's what can provide an opportunity for someone out there. There's a lot happening at the moment, even here in the local scene, as far as young people are concerned, looking for role models, maybe turning to coping mechanisms like drugs is becoming a big issue here. What do you think we can do, Nada, in that space with the players that you work with, and the messaging to ensure that we get our young people to have coping mechanisms which are not unhealthy, or which are taking away their lives?
Yes, absolutely. That's something we're doing in rugby to understand, help our players to understand your position on this platform is bigger than the game itself. We need to see how we can help other people. I met a good friend of mine, which I made on a morning last week. He was sitting in town. He was waiting for some work to do outside one of the coffee shops, and I invited him in. He was one of the Shushan boys in town. This is just my own little personal thing. I try to befriend them, on an individual basis, one by one. So I called him in, and then I asked him his name, and we got to know each other. And I knew he knew me, but I acted as if, I'm just another person. And then I asked him, so what are you good at? What's your talent? And then he said, he mentioned what he was good at. And I said, you can really help a lot of people with that talent. And then I shared with him the analogy of a tree. I said, no, mango season is coming soon. Have you ever seen a mango tree eat its own fruit? And then he looked at me and said, no. I said, yeah, neither have I. If you find one, then call me. And then I said, if we can, in a day, try and look for someone who can have some of your fruit, you can help in whatever way. And we had a really good chat. And for me, this is something I share within our rugby circles. Speak to our young men. And I haven't had that chance with our women, but with our young men, how can you help somebody who has no opportunity to ever repay you? If you've done that, that's bigger than any gold medal in this world. And that's just my personal take. That's how I do this job. That's why I do it. And that's what fuels the journey, as a coach.
Final question, the journey to the next Rugby World Cup in 2027, closer to home this time in Australia, will be very interesting. What is the Drua and Fiji Rugby's focus based on your perspective?
I think it's exciting. God willing, that 2027 World Cup is going to be so close to home. I think Fiji will probably relocate to Australia or build a bridge from Nandi to Sydney somewhere. I don't know, but I think, within that time, obviously Drua has high aspirations to be top 4 this year. They reached top 4, and that has to be the plan. That has to be a goal. We'll have to challenge ourselves as coaches, as individuals, as players. And within that time zone, we want to really challenge, our players up in Europe. They have really come of age. The Drua program has now challenged them as well to be on top of their game, to be on top of their physical conditioning, because within this window, there's going to be more interest now in tier 1 nations wanting to play the Flying Fijians. See, if we can habitually, increase our mileage playing tier 1s and win against tier 1s, and if Drua can be in a position to win that super title, at least within this period, that sets us up really well for 2027. And there's nothing there to stop us from doing it. That's a goal, but we need to really challenge ourselves on changing things. And I think we have to not fear changes and really challenge ourselves. And that's, I'm saying, as coaches, as players, within our family circles, within our culture, what do we change within our culture so that we can reach that? And then that's something we talk about a lot within this recent Flying Fijians campaign.
Naca, always a pleasure having you on Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm sure the viewers and listeners have enjoyed this session thoroughly, and all the best to the Drua who are in camp now, preparing and ready for their big game, starting off with playing the Auckland Blues in February next year.
Naca, Vijay, and always a pleasure to be. And just a big shout out to all our people who support the team. We feel it, and thank you so much. And we appreciate all the support that you've given the team for the recent World Cup campaign. Naca.
That's the show for tonight. Until next Wednesday, have a great evening.